Welcome back to Vivowire, the podcast from Workvivo by Zoom, where we get into the ideas, leadership habits, and culture shifts shaping the modern world of work. In this episode, you're going to love it. I'm joined by the brilliant Advita Patel. She's an award-winning comms consultant, international speaker, founder of Comms Rebel, and co-author of Building a Culture of Inclusivity. In other words, she knows what great leadership and real inclusion actually look like. We talk about how organizations are finally moving beyond performative DEI and what it really takes to embed inclusion into everyday culture. Evita also gives us a sneak peek into her new book, Decoding Confidence, and breaks down her Believe framework, including which confidence habits leaders struggle with the most. Spoiler, it's probably not the ones you think. So if you care about inclusive leadership, authentic confidence, and doing the deeper work, this one's for you. Let's get into it.
Thank you, Barbara. It's an absolute honor to be here today.
We're going to jump right in with a nice, juicy question for you. Can you share a moment, Evita, in your career that really fundamentally changed the way you think about work, and how did that really shape your trajectory and influence the work you're doing today?
So I spent probably 15 years of my career conforming to what I believed was needed in that workplace for me to succeed. And what I mean by that is whatever was told or asked of me, I conformed. Advita, go and do this course. Advita, go and do this program. Advita, you need more experience in X, Y, Z. And I just followed the patterns of behavior that was expected of me. And I mimicked a lot of the behaviors that I witnessed in leaders around me. But in doing that, Barbara, in the 15 years I worked in-house, I lost my identity. I forgot who I was, and I didn't really know who the real Advita was, to be totally frank with you. And what I realized, I wasn't a wallflower by any stretch. I still spoke with confidence. I especially in communications and PR, you've got to be able to build a trusted relationship and connections with your stakeholders. But I didn't know who I was. And I had a huge confidence crash in 2018 where I lost faith in my ability of my skill set, my own self-belief, my own self-value. And I really doubted whether or not the communications world was for someone like me. And it was a big tumbling crash. And it was around that time I decided that I had to do something. And it was actually after a phone conversation with a friend of mine on my way to work. And I was complaining to her about how unfair life was. I was like, oh my goodness, everything is just not going in the way I wanted it to go. I can't believe I'm doing this ridiculous role. I can't believe I have to travel 2 hours into work every day. What is going on with I deserve more. I genuinely just talked at her for about 40 minutes. And then it went really quiet on the phone, and I thought I'd lost her because I went through a black spot. And I was like, hello, you still there? And she's like, I'm here. I'm listening to what you're saying. And all I'm thinking, Advita, is what are you going to do about it? I was like, oh, what do you mean? She goes, well, all I've heard for the last few months is how unfair everything is. And I'm not saying it isn't, but what are you going to do to change it? How are you going to take ownership of things that are happening to you? And I was like, oh my goodness, she's obviously got off the wrong side of bed today. Like, what is happening here? I was like, oh my goodness. I said, are the kids okay? Are they giving you trouble? And she's like, nothing to do with the kids. The kids are fine. But I'm asking you, what are you going to do? And that, Barbara, was a bit of an epiphany for me. And I remember pulling into the car park at work. And normally I sit behind the steering wheel, contemplating life, taking deep breaths before I walked into the office. But this time it was a light bulb moment. And she was so right. I was like, what am I doing about what is happening to me? The one thing that we can control in life is how we react to situations that are happening to us, and what we can control in what we do next. But that was the moment my life changed. And I went home that evening and researched confidence, culture, and imposter syndrome. And that's where my kind of, I suppose, obsession, I would call it to an extent, entered into the world of confident workplaces and why we need confident workplaces to help people be their best selves.
That's incredible. I mean, I feel like, well, thank you for sharing that. I feel like you're not alone. So many people kind of struggle with that, where maybe they're unhappy at work or they just feel really stuck and they feel like the world is against them. But to turn that into action, that really, I mean, I'm sure took some confidence and that aha moment, that light bulb moment.
And you know what I will say, because there will be listeners who will be listening to what we're talking about and go, well, I have had things against me, and I'm a South Asian woman working in the field of communications. And there are not many people like me. And of course, there's been adversity in my career. And of course, there's been things that could have been prevented. But I realized in that moment on that conversation is that I can't control those things. I just can't. So what can I control? And is it my own self-belief and self-value and worth that's stopping me progressing in the way I want to progress? And why am I always waiting for validation and permission from others? Like, who am I? And when you don't know yourself well enough at all, you start adopting and mimicking other people's behaviors because you haven't had the time to investigate who you are. And I'm a big advocate of taking that time and understanding what are your values, what do you stand for, what do you want to, what legacy do you kind of want to leave, what do you want to be known for? I hadn't done that work, and that's why I didn't know who I was. And I just spent a lot of my time listening to other people's version of who I was. And we do that from children. From children, you get told by your parents who you should be and how you should behave. You then go to school and get given report cards and all sorts of things by teachers and lecturers to tell you how you should behave. Then you go into the workplace and you're given performance reviews and KPIs and how you should behave as a leader. And it's no surprise in all of that kind of being told who you should be, you forget who you are. So doing that work on yourself is critical in order for you to be your best self in the workplace.
As you've got your comms rebel sign behind you, I'm thinking about sort of rebelling against the norm and finding your own path and
Yeah.
how that can be challenging, but like it is so important to take that time to do that self-reflection and do that work because we only kind of get one shot at this. And yeah, I think it's so critical. I do want to touch, I know like a lot of your past work has been around inclusive cultures and how we build those. So I'm kind of curious, especially in the state of the world today in 2026, how would you describe sort of the current state of DE&I?
I mean, that's again a great question. And it does link into confident workplaces because one of the reason I got into the confidence world in terms of more than personal, but more into professional is because a lot of the challenges in the workplaces when it came to building confident cultures was down to the lack of self-belief in certain leaders. And as we've seen over the last few years, DEI is at a bit of a crossroads right now, I would say. There's a lot of fatigue, there's a lot of fear, and in some places, there's also a very deliberate pulling back, I would say. But I'm always a bit of an optimistic person with a sprinkle of realism. And I don't think inclusion is over or failing, to be honest. I'm actually on the kind of pathway of believing that performative D&I is being exposed. And what is shifting is that organizations can no longer, in my opinion, rely on those performative statements or slogans or annual awareness days or moments that we often used to see without actually taking real action. The work is now very much about behavioral elements of it rather than just kind of the big campaigns that we used to do. It's about how decisions get made in organizations and who's heard in the room and who feels confident enough to challenge and disagree and say things like, I don't know. It's that kind of ultimate psychological safety that Amy Edmondson spoke about in her book in Fearless Organizations. That's where inclusion and DEI is moving to. How safe are we creating our culture so people can be their best selves, demonstrate genuine connection? So DEI, in my opinion, isn't gone. I just think it's quieter, but much deeper for those organizations who understand and recognize that it's still needed in order to have a thriving workplace where people can be, as I said before, their best self. So it's less branding, less performatism, less tokenism, and definitely more courage and confidence in doing the right things, personally.
Obviously, I'm joining from the States, so there is all these different sort of climates and microclimates when it comes to DE&I, and right now it's a very like, there's all sorts of challenges going on for folks in, in that space, and I like your idea of where it might be quieter, but it's moving much deeper, and I really hope that that's the case.
And the challenge, that you just shared there, and I get, in America and the US, it's scary times right now. We're witnessing it from the UK perspective. And I've got clients and colleagues over in the US who share every day some of the challenges that they're facing. My big take is with leaders that I work with is that like I said to you before in my story, that what is within your remit of control. How are you helping people belong and feel that they can add value? Every single leader, every single colleague has a responsibility and accountability to take. You don't necessarily need hundreds of millions of dollars to be able to do this well. It's about recognizing who are the quiet ones, why are they quiet, how are they feeling, how are they performing, what questions am I asking of them? I say to leaders all the time, have you asked your team what do they need from you to be able to do their best work? A simple question like that can absolutely transform how people feel, how they belong and the value that they're bringing. Of course, investment in this space is required and needed. I'm not saying it isn't, but everyday moments are just as impactful as those big initiatives and programs. And in fact, they can have bigger impact. So if you are a leader, I would ask you to think about when was the last time you checked in on your team or even a colleague. When was the last time you checked in on someone who may not be part of the dominant culture, but may not feel that they can add value? And I always look for those red flags. Who are the quiet voices? Who are the ones who are not switching on the camera, for example? Who are the ones who are not speaking up or not being asked? Who are the ones who are getting promotions and getting opportunities? And who are the ones who are not? Who are the ones that we trust implicitly and who are the ones we don't trust? And why do we not trust them? And why do we trust those people? Those are the questions that we need to be asking ourselves because they're the ones that we can control. And people are depending on certain people and certain influencers out there in the world, leaders space are depending on us feeling the fear and not doing the things in the right way because fear causes a frenzy. And when frenzy is caused, people start attacking each other. And that's when we need to kind of step back from that and go, actually, what am I doing to help my organization and the people around me feel that they can do the best work and feel valued in the work that they're doing as well?
Like, you're a big believer in, Simon Sinek's, like, "Start with the why," right? I'm a huge believer in that, but, thinking of leaders, what happens if the leaders don't see the why or don't believe in the why? This is something I've personally come up against in my career, and as someone who's, been involved with, ERGs and things like that, like, can be a major, major challenge. Can these initiatives succeed without that executive support?
In order for change to take place, and I mean real change, you do need executive sponsorship for it to really be embedded in the culture. There is that whole thing, you lead by example, right? And that is still critical in the modern workplace today. You generally mimic, because I said to you before, when I was growing and learning in my career, you do mimic the leadership behaviors that are around you, especially when you're still uncertain about who you are as a leader. And if leaders are demonstrating the lack of care or lack of interest in certain initiatives, it becomes about those people over there rather than the entire organization. And I've seen that play out time and time again in organizations that I support, that the marginalized and underrepresented people are kind of trying their best to raise visibility of the work that they're doing and ultimately being ignored by the rest of the organization, because the rest of the organization don't have to face into the adversity that some of those individuals might be facing. And because their senior leadership team are not caring about those individuals, they think, well, why should I? And I've got a bit of a bugbear around employee resourcing groups that are not sponsored and supported effectively because it's emotional labor you're putting onto these individuals to fix the culture basically without any investment of resources. And it's incredibly unfair on those individuals to put them in that position just so you can look good in your annual report to say that you got ERGs, when in fact all you're doing is just putting emotional turmoil and labour and trauma on some of these people, knowing full well that you've got no intention to make any change in the organisation. You only have to look at International Women's Day, Barbara, and the year on year, the number of organisations that participate in this International Women's Day. But then you look at the senior leadership team and they're all male, and you look at the kind of progression in how women are seen in boardrooms, and it's not there. Same with race and ethnicity. You have these underrepresented groups around race and ethnicity, but then you go up the ladder and the chain and you rarely see a Black or South or East Asian face in some of those rooms.
Yeah, I think that's like circling back to kind of the conversation around like the performative nature of a lot of like DE&I initiatives. I feel like people don't necessarily think about ERGs in that way, but it's a really valid point. And I think it's kind of a sad story that I've certainly seen firsthand. Um, but yeah, that's a big challenge, I think, right now.
I think a lot of, don't get me wrong, there are some organisations that do an incredible job with ERGs. I've got clients who are doing fantastic work. They've got executive sponsors. They give people a remuneration for doing the work. They reward people for going above and beyond. They do some fantastic work. And those are the organisations I look up to and go, you are doing it right. And you're making the change needed to by ensuring that you're implementing some of the challenges that some of these individuals are facing, and making change happen.
I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to make sure we have some time to talk about confidence. So I know you shared in your story earlier, and kind of reading a little bit about your upcoming book. You weren't born confident, neither was I, and it's something that you had to really. It happened as you sort of grew up, right? You were over preparing to feel safe. You were doing this mimicking and kind of second guessing your voice, and you said you had to kind of hit that confidence rock bottom to get there, right? So I'm kind of curious, how did you go from that point to, I know, writing a whole book, Decoding Confidence?
So when I had that epiphany in 2018, I went home and did that research around confidence, culture, imposter syndrome, workplace. And what I witnessed in my research and by speaking to individuals, that there were certain habits that leaders were performing in order for them to be their true self. And I started to get really curious about it. And I started to learn more about what these habits were. And I started to implement them myself. And so I started to kind of understand what these micro habits were. And that's where the believe framework came from. You strongly have to believe in yourself so other people believe in you. If you don't believe in yourself, then how are other people going to believe in what you're saying? And the 7 habits that I uncovered is that mnemonic of believe. Boldness is one thing. And I don't mean how loud you are. That's nothing to do with confidence. A lot of people mistake loudness for being confident. And in fact, the opposite is often true. The louder some people are, the less confidence they actually have. Their self-esteem is actually quite low, and they mimic, and they're masking, their boldness just to kind of make sure they're not being questioned. So they come across as quite ego driven. Then you've got empathy, and empathy is a big part of who we are. And I don't mean listening with sympathy. It's having that empathetic nature of understanding that everyone is different. People aren't difficult, they're different. And as soon as we kind of realize and understand that, we demonstrate more empathy and understand what it's like from their perspective. Then you have, learning around how we learn and how we make sure that we're keeping on top of everything that goes on, and understanding what learning looks like for everyone is very different. Everyone learns very differently. And I think we're past the academic style of learning. I think everyone has a very different way of adopting how they build knowledge. And knowledge is the one thing that no one can really take away from us. And I'm a lifelong learner. And the more I learn about myself, the more I learn about my industry, the more I learn about leaders and culture, the more confident I felt in my abilities. And I think they go hand in hand, as we all know. Integrity, I've spoken about. A lot of people think they have integrity. And in fact, in my research, a lot of people I don't. which feels a really tough thing to say, but we don't. You know,
Especially when you're talking about leaders.
we don't, right? We do come forward, like I did, you know, we like to believe that we have, but when we're kind of pushed against the grain, or when we're asked to do something that we're uncomfortable with or goes against our values, more often than not, we do it because we want to keep the peace. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to seem like we're troublemakers. We don't want to seem like we're disruptors. So we just crack on. And not everybody has the privilege either to say, I'm out of here. I quit. I'm going to go and find a new job. Not everyone can do that. So you do have to go against your values. And that's when your integrity is questioned. And it's a very uncomfortable thing for a lot of people to recognize, because a lot of people like to think they have it. But in fact, in my research and the work I've done in my kind of surveys and stuff, is that a lot of people struggle with it, and which knocks your self-esteem, by the way. When you don't live to your values, your self-esteem and self-belief gets knocked because you're not being genuine to who you are and what you stand for. And then empowerment was how we empower each other and how we empower ourselves, most importantly. Then vulnerability, because in order to be confident, we need to demonstrate an element of vulnerability. And I don't mean dumping your emotional baggage and telling people your innermost thoughts. That's actually can be manipulative in how you do that. So it's about being quite intentional with what you share and what value that's going to bring to the teams that you're working in. And then my most favorite habit, and the one I think, if you're going to ignore all the others, this is the one thing I would say everybody should focus on, is energy. Because energy is when you are tired, when you are exhausted, when you have decision fatigue, when there's lots going on in your life, you will find that your confidence and your self-esteem and self-value is depleting. And you can't make a decision when your energy is absolutely all over the place. And you need to be very intentional with where your energy is coming from and where you get your energy from. So what boosts your energy and where your energy is being consumed. And I treat energy like a commodity. So I treat it like an actual monetary value. Because I think when we do that, we pay more attention to it. So when we say yes to things that we know we're going to resent afterwards, how much of money is that?
I love this framework. I'm pretty much obsessed with it. I have a couple follow-up questions for you. I'd be curious to, in kind of conversations and working with leaders of the points of the acronym, is there one area in particular that people you find are like most commonly struggling with today, or does it really depend on the individual?
No, there is actually, there's two key ones that most leaders tend to struggle with. First is boldness. And that was a bit of a surprise to me, even when I did a survey to back up some of the research. And so 507 people, leaders from various different industries completed my survey. And boldness was the number one habit that came up with the biggest challenge that people have in terms of, how do I show up genuinely? How do I articulate my thoughts without having to be someone I'm not? How do I come across as confident if I'm a quieter person or I'm more introverted? Those were the things that people do worry about. So boldness is something that I see quite a lot in the work that I do with leaders. And then the other habit is vulnerability. So vulnerability is something that a lot of folks struggle with because they are worried about being too vulnerable and what that means for them. Or some leaders can be over vulnerable, if that is a thing, believe it or not, where they are not taking accountability for their actions. So if they get called out on something that they've done, they think downloading their emotional baggage on making excuses for the behaviour is a get out of jail card. And that can be quite manipulative. And I did my latest podcast episode on confident vulnerability and what we actually mean by that, because I think it's Brené Brown, who I call my future best friend, because one day
I'm shocked you haven't met.
I know.
I mean, I'm like shocked. I'm gonna will it into the world. We're gonna make it happen.
Thank you. And if anyone knows Brené, please do the introductions. Like I am.
I'm sure we've got a connection somewhere.
Yeah, it's all about shameless audacity, right? I mean, if I didn't do confidence stuff, what's this about? But yeah, no, Brené's work, The Power of Vulnerability, I love her work, and I think she's an incredible person in doing this work. But I think her work has been misused and misunderstood and misrepresented. And we need to get back to genuine vulnerability and what that actually means in the workplace. Because I think it can be manipulated. And a lot of folks have felt that personally themselves by people manipulating vulnerability to get their own way. And others don't show enough of themselves to build connection, and they hold themselves back in the fear of being called out or not knowing. And it's very dependent on your cultural background as well. So if you're a woman, if you're a person from an underrepresented culture, if you are somebody who has to prove themselves in a dominant culture, you may be less reluctant to be vulnerable because it may be used against you. So there's so many different challenges around vulnerability that we need to kind of unpick and educate others on what this actually means in the workplace.
We are going to do a quick little section that we're calling culture myth busting. So, kind of a bit of a rapid fire section here. We've got some sort of like culture myths, cliches that I'm looking for, sort of like your hot take, whether or not you agree or disagree, and maybe tell me why.
Okay.
Hybrid work kills culture.
Agree.
Ooh, okay. Why is
know.
that?
Oh God, this is so controversial. I'm going to get so much hate. Please don't hate me. But I don't think the right systems are in place for good hybrid work. And I strongly believe that organizations haven't invested enough time to get the systems right and put the policies right and get the processes right. And it has ended up, in my opinion, killing culture in some organizations because they haven't done the right work. I'm not saying the principle isn't right. I do believe that we should have flexibility and have hybrid working, but I don't think the systems are right. And the investment hasn't been made. We haven't cracked it. People are getting missed. People are being ignored. People are not getting the support. People are not getting the investment. I'm still trying to understand, how do you learn especially entry level and early career, how do you learn from others? And I don't think organizations have put proper systems in place. So don't hate me. Please don't hate me. But I do think
Don't come after in the comments, please.
No, don't. But I just think proper systems need to be put in place for true hybrid to work effectively.
Yeah, and like to your point of like overlooking, quiet folks and like, this disjointed experience that probably is to some degree, if an organization hasn't figured it out yet, it's probably exacerbated in a situation like that. So, okay, last one for you, and I feel like it's going to be spicy. Quiet employees aren't leadership material.
Oh, absolutely they are. They are 100% leadership material. And like I said to you at the start, around the confidence element, there's so much bias and discrimination against people who are quiet or are more reflective or take a little bit longer to make a decision because they just need time to go and just sit on what has been shared with them. And the bias that we have towards these individuals is so unfair. And I am not, and by the way, I am not what you would class as traditional introvert. I am very much on the ambivert extrovert scale. I 100% admit that. But I have seen friends who are more introverted get bypassed all the time for promotions and opportunities because their leader has made an assumption that they are not confident. They don't have gravitas. I hate that word. They don't have gravitas. They don't have the impact. People don't listen to them. And I always ask the question of my friend and say to them, like, well, what evidence do they have to demonstrate that you're not having the impact that you need? Because is that their perception because they're a louder, more extroverted leader? So they believe that you're not good enough because you don't match their version of what good leadership looks like. And that's the question I will ask all of the leaders that I work with, is that, are you comparing good leadership based on what you are delivering and how you react? Because that bias is real. And we form an allegiance and a relationship with people who are like us. That's just natural human being kind of
like me bias.
The like me bias, right? Like, oh, they're loud, they're extroverted, they command attention. So, and I do that, so they're great leaders. And the quiet leaders don't often get a look in. And I will, those folks who are listening who are more introverted, a bit quieter, a bit more reflective, I would say, do not ever allow anyone to change your approach, but stand firm in your conviction and hold them accountable in terms of the biases and discrimination they may be showing, and ask them to show you evidence of where you haven't had the desired impact.
Okay, so before we wrap, I want to kind of bring this full circle to a little bit more action and talk about kind of tangible takeaways for our listeners and viewers today. So, I know we have this amazing belief framework, which I love. Are there any other sort of practical tools, rituals, or habits that you use or organizations use to really intentionally shape their culture for the better?
Yes, there are a number of things that you can do, and I'm going to share 3 things that you can do personally and professionally. The first thing is, as I've said throughout this conversation, is what's in the center of my control. So what can I control in this situation right now to help improve someone's experience of work? And a lot of folks will often say to me, well, I'm not a leader, or I don't have a manager status, or I don't have decision-making capabilities. We all have a part to play, and we're all leaders within our own right. So my challenge, if you want to call it that, is to ask you to think about, actually, what can I do within the controls I have in this environment to help improve the working life of people around me? And that could be as simple as asking people how their day went. I mean, it sounds obvious, right, Barbara? But oh my goodness, a number of people who don't just slow down enough to ask those types of well-being, connection type of questions. It could be, how can I help you today? What's missing for you? It could be just looking out for people's behavior changing. The second thing, and this is a personal thing, often, especially from a communications perspective, we are entering situations that can be uncomfortable, and we're often getting told a lot more no's than yeses. And that can knock our confidence in our ability. And we can start second guessing ourselves, and we can start being a little bit more demeaning towards ourselves and start questioning whether we're good at what we do. I have a thing called the smile file, or the happiness folder, which I have on my phone. And in this folder on my phone, there's things that have brought me joy, things that have feedback that I received, really good feedback, quotes that really inspire me. And when I'm feeling that spiral, that confidence spiral, I will often go into my folder and be like, I am good. I am good at what I do. I've got evidence that I'm good at what I do. This moment doesn't define my entire career, and it doesn't define me. This is just a moment. It's a learning point. The third one is your personal board of directors. So who are your personal board of directors? So working in the world of comms can be quite isolating and quite lonely. Often we're a small team or no team, right? One person team sometimes. Where are your confidants? Where are your supporters? And I am very, very cautious of who I receive advice from, because everybody loves to give advice and feedback unsolicited at times, right? And we get a lot of it in the workplace.
Slippery, dangerous thing
It's
too.
a slippery slope. And let's be honest, right? Everybody is an expert in communications. Everybody knows good comms, right? And we are red penned all the time. And fair, like whatever, everyone's allowed an opinion, but who are we getting our support from? And I have a thing called the personal board of directors, and the learning circle, as I call it as well. And we all have directors in the workplace that make decisions about the business. But who are our directors of our life? Who are we going to for support? And in our kind of personal board of directors, we have to be quite intentional about who's around that table. As Brené Brown says, don't listen to the people in the cheap seats, right? And that's what I would advise folks, because people will always give you lots of different bits of advice. And sometimes you may take it, sometimes you won't, and sometimes you feel you have to because of who they are, potentially. But you have to be intentional with your kind of board and your learning cycle. So you've got like the bridge. The bridge is someone who can build connections for you, who introduces you to people that you may not know. Then you have the person who holds the mirror up to you, right? So they're the ones who keep you real, like my friend on the phone. Like, will hold the mirror up, keep you honest, will make sure that you don't drink your own Kool-Aid, as we say in my friendship circle, that you stay real, you hold the mirror up, you hold you accountable, and they don't beat around the bush with what's going on, and you trust them implicitly because they've got your best interest at heart. And then you've got the person who is your champion, your supporter. They will, and we all need people like this in our lives. The person who will go, you've got this, you're great, you're going to be brilliant, you're going to be fantastic, you don't worry, you got this. We need those people in our lives as well. And they're the kind of 3 core personal board of director personalities I would say you need around that table. And they don't have to know each other, by the way, your personal board of directors. It could be someone that you've never met but inspires you. It could be somebody that isn't in your industry but you learn a lot from them. Just be conscious about who is around that table and who takes up that commodity that I mentioned before in terms of energy. And how are they helping you thrive and be your best self? And I think we could, if we all had our personal board of directors, we'd have much more confidence in who we are and what we do, and be able to stand, with our conviction and be able to speak up in situations, because we know we've got these incredible individuals who've got our back every step of the way.
I'm loving the visual of like an imaginary table where everyone's sitting around. So I'm going to wrap us up now. And just one final question for you. So you've worked with so many different organizations and leaders across the globe, and you've seen the challenges and the progress. So when you think about what's next, what genuinely is giving you hope about the future of work?
Do you know what's giving me the hope is right now we are going through a lot of turbulence, I would say, in the world. We're seeing lots of leaders who are not living, I would say, to their what's the word? Integrity. That's a word. They don't have any integrity, in my opinion, right? And I think a lot of folks are seeing what they don't like and are stepping into that space in speaking up and holding these leaders accountable. And I think we'll see more and more of that as the new generations come into the workplace. And I've got hope that we will start standing up against some of the bullish behaviours that we've seen in recent times and hold people accountable for the actions that they have taken, because that is something I think has been missing in the last few years. But I have hope that now we've seen the kind of consequences of some of the decisions these people have taken, people are now up in arms about it and are standing firm against their conviction and saying no longer are we accepting this type of behaviour. And I hope as time goes on we see more and more of that responsible leadership. And I'm just keeping hope that we see the workplace transform and leaders actually start paying attention to how people are feeling valued, because I think that's really important.
Well, you are certainly, I feel like, a huge part of the change with the work that you're doing. And I want to make sure if someone wants to work with you at Vita, which they absolutely should, they want to learn more about your work, they want to grab a copy of your book. How can they learn more about Advita Patel?
So if they want to learn more about the book, then they can visit decodingconfidence.com, and everything is on there about the book and the workshops and all of that kind of stuff that I do. If they want to get more involved in inclusive cultures and internal comms, then commsrebel.com. But generally, you'll find me on LinkedIn talking about all of this stuff. It seems to be my safe space, LinkedIn, at the moment. So I'm always sharing my thoughts and opinions on there. So follow me on LinkedIn, and there's all sorts of different things you can get involved in.
Very cool. My list is getting longer of things I need to purchase after today's conversation. So I guess to wrap us up, Advita, thank you just so much for this amazing, honest, and inspiring conversation. It's really been such a pleasure to get to know you and a little bit more about your work, about your framework. If this episode sparked anything for you, share it with others. Keep that conversation going. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for tuning into Vivowire, and we will see you next time.